The White House at night was never silent. Even at its calmest, the building hummed with the low drone of history, with the scrape of shoes on polished floors, with the whispers of guards who walked the same paths over and over until the marble knew their weight by memory. But that night, the hum was different. It wasn't the sound of power. It was the sound of something buried too deep, something pressing to be heard. Putin had walked its corridors before, but never like this. He wasn't escorted. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't performing for cameras. This was the hollow hour. Long after the lights outside had dimmed and the staff had vanished into the shadows of offices and side doors, Trump was elsewhere, speaking to aides in a muffled chamber that didn't concern him. So they thought. Yet Putin wandered. He moved down the hall lined with portraits, faces of past leaders staring, back in oil and canvas. The light from chandeliers struck their eyes in ways it shouldn't have. They followed him, cold and accusing, as if they didn't approve of his footsteps. But one portrait stood out from the rest. Trump's, enormous and recent, hanging at the very end of the corridor, larger than it should have been. The face didn't sit still. The lips looked too soft, the skin too flushed, as if it were not painted at all but alive, straining through the frame. Putin stopped. He could feel his pulse in his ears, louder than the silence. He leaned forward to study the frame, to find the trick, and his palm brushed against the wall beside it. The panel shifted. Not loudly, not with a click or a scrape. It gave almost like skin, soft under pressure, shifting just enough to betray the seam. He froze. His hand trembled on the surface. Then, without planning it, he pushed harder. The panel slid back slow and silent, exhaling air that stank of damp earth and something metallic, like blood that had been sealed for decades. A passage yawned open. The walls inside weren't like the White House walls. They weren't clean or white or elegant. They dripped. Condensation clung to their surface in beads that rolled downward like sweat, leaving streaks in the stone. Putin hesitated at the threshold, looking behind him. But the corridor above was still. Guards marched in rhythm far away, oblivious. The portrait stared. He stepped inside. The air closed over him instantly. It was colder, yet heavier, pressing against his lungs. The sound of the White House, its hum, its history, its whispers, died the moment he crossed. Only his breathing followed him now, bouncing back at him in echoes that didn't sound the same. His breath came out steady but returned jagged, as though something else was breathing with him. A narrow stairwell dropped down into the earth. The stone steps were slick, the handrail corroded and wet. He touched it anyway, and it flexed slightly under his grip. He pulled his hand away. His fingers glistened. Not with water. Something thicker. Something that clung. He wiped them on his suit, but the smear didn't vanish. He descended. The stairwell curled down like a spine, endless, spiraling into the dark. The walls pulsed faintly with veins of green light, too faint to illuminate but strong enough to confuse the eye. Sometimes the veins moved, like something alive was trapped just beneath the surface, slithering through the walls in silence. Every step pressed harder into him. The silence wasn't silence anymore. It was a hum in his skull, vibrating the bones behind his ears. He thought of submarines he had once toured in his youth. The pressure of the ocean crushing metal plates, the eerie sensation of knowing. Tons of water wanted to break through and swallow the men inside. This felt the same. Not water, but something else. Something heavier. He passed markings on the wall, scratches. Some shallow. Some gouged deep, long, clawed lines as if people had tried to climb back up. His stomach knotted. He kept walking. His shoes splashed in puddles that weren't puddles, more like slick patches of mucus left behind by something unseen. Finally, the stairwell ended. Putin stepped into a corridor, unlike anything he had ever imagined. Could exist beneath the White House. It wasn't built. It wasn't constructed by human hands. It looked grown. Steel beams arched across the ceiling. But they weren't whole. They were twisted, rusted, fused into the walls as if they had been swallowed. The floor stretched long and wet, pooling with green light that leaked from cracks in the surface. The smell of rot was stronger now, thick enough to burn the back of his throat. He forced himself to move forward. At the farthest end of the corridor, a door waited. Not wood, not steel, Flesh, seamless, organic, its surface stretched tight like skin over bone, veins glowing faintly beneath. It twitched when he looked at it. The hum in his skull pulsed louder, pressing harder, until it was no longer sound but thought, forcing itself into his mind. The portraits upstairs had watched him. The panel had let him through. The stairwell had swallowed him. And now this door waited, pulsing like a heart. Putin raised his hand, trembling, and placed it on the surface. It was warm. The door shivered, and then it began to open. The door peeled open like torn flesh, groaning as though something behind it resisted being revealed. Putin stepped through, and the air changed at once. He had been breathing damp metal and dust, but here it was different. It was thicker, wet. Each inhale dragged a weight through his chest, heavy with copper, formaldehyde, and rot. The chamber was vast, far larger than anything that should have existed beneath the White House. Its ceiling disappeared into shadow, its corners drowned in a green haze that seemed to breathe with the walls. The glow came not from lamps, but from the rows of glass tanks stretching into the dark, each one lit from within by the sickly liquid that sloshed inside. He approached the nearest. The glass was fogged, cracked in places, breathing faintly as if it were under pressure. Inside floated a human shape, suspended in fluid the color of spoiled bile. The skin was pale, nearly translucent, stretched tight over bones too sharp. The eyes were open, and they followed him. Putin said nothing. His face remained carved from stone, but his pulse ticked louder in his throat. He moved to the next tank. This one did not hold a human, at least not anymore. Its body had been spliced, torn, rebuilt. Limbs too long, one arm splitting into two halfway down, fingers tapering into needle points. Its head lolled to the side, jaw unhinged, teeth filed into splinters. When his shadow crossed its body, the jaw snapped shut with a click so loud it rattled the tank. Further down, another, a woman this time, or what remained of one. Her face was intact, her eyes wide with something beyond terror. But her torso was hollow, ribs splayed open like the frame of a birdcage. Something pulsed inside, twitching with every flicker of the green light. Her lips moved soundlessly. She was trying to scream. The tanks grew worse as he went. One was cracked, its glass bowed outward, fluid dripping in slow, steady trails across the floor. Inside, the body pressed its face against the glass, its eyes black voids that leaked streams of ink into the liquid. It smiled when it saw him. The glass strained, groaning, as if it would burst with one more breath. Another tank was empty, just shards of glass clinging to its frame. Liquid pooled at its base, footprints smeared across the floor, vanishing into the dark corner of the chamber. And in that corner, stacked like discarded paper, were bodies, not creatures. Not experiments, people, soldiers in uniform, faces slack and pale, men in suits, skin bloated from rot. Women in dresses, eyes half open, mouths frozen mid-scream. Their limbs tangled together in a heap of death, their flesh stained with the same green fluid that filled the tanks. Putin stopped, staring at them. He recognized some of the faces. He had seen them on screens, in reports, in the kinds of briefings only leaders received. Missing diplomats, vanished aides, people the world had whispered about but never found. And they were here in the chamber. The sound came again, low, wet, crawling through the air like something, breathing right against his neck. He turned. At the far end of the room, half shrouded in shadow, one of the largest tanks shifted. Not cracked, not broken, but alive. The liquid inside churned, sloshing violently as something stirred. He couldn't make out its full shape, but what he could see pressed his stomach into ice. An arm that bent in too many places, a hand that split into three, a head that tilted and reshaped itself like melted wax, never deciding what face to wear. It pressed against the glass, slowly, patiently. The tank groaned, and then it leaned forward. For a moment, he thought it would break free, but it didn't. It only pressed closer, until the entire tank quivered under its weight. And then it smiled, not with lips, not with teeth. Its whole body stretched into a grin that had no end. Putin felt the walls tremble. The green glow pulsed faster. the air thickening until every breath scraped his throat raw. He knew then this was not storage, not science, not control. This was a prison, and the prison was awake. Putin turned from the thing in the tank and forced himself to walk. He didn't run, though every nerve in his body screamed to. He had learned long ago that predators chased movement, and this chamber felt like it was alive, listening, waiting for him to slip. His shoes slapped the wet floor too loudly. Each step echoed back at him, distorted, like the sound wasn't only his. Behind him, the liquid sloshed violently. A glass tank shuddered. He didn't look. He didn't need to. He felt the weight of something enormous pressing against the chamber, pressing against him like it wanted to crawl into his skin. The hum that had filled the room now rose into a drone that rattled his bones. The door loomed ahead. That seamless patch of flesh-like material, glowing faintly, waiting for him. He pressed his palm against it. Nothing happened. It pulsed under his hand, warm, almost alive, but it didn't open. His breath hitched. The drone behind him swelled into a roar. Then, glass shattered. He spun. One of the smaller tanks had burst wide open. Liquid rushed across the floor, pooling toward his shoes. And in the middle of it, a figure dragged itself upright, twitching, its head jerking in sharp, unnatural angles. Its skin sagged in strips, its jaw distended too far. And yet, its face carried the faint outline of Trump. Not perfectly, not clean, but enough. A distorted Trump, twitching, drooling, smiling too wide. Putin slammed his hand harder against the door. The flesh peeled open at last with a wet tearing sound, releasing him into the stairwell. He stumbled through and it sealed behind him, muffling the chorus of shrieks that erupted in the chamber. But the sound didn't die. It clung to him, pressing into his ears as if it had burrowed inside. The stairwell wasn't the same. It was narrower, hotter. The walls pulsed with light like veins, beating to a heart that wasn't his. Shadows followed him, but they didn't belong to him. He climbed fast, clutching the railing. But the metal bent under his grip, slick and soft like flesh pretending to be steel. His lungs ached. His vision swam. Every step was heavier, as if the chamber below didn't want to let him go. Then light. The seam at the top cracked open, spilling pale glow across his face. He dragged himself through, gasping, collapsing onto the White House carpet. He was back in the corridor. The chandeliers swayed, though there was no wind. The portraits leaned forward slightly, their eyes wide, painted mouths curling into cruel, knowing smirks. He slammed the hatch shut, but this time it didn't seal. It dissolved, leaving nothing behind, as if there had never been a door at all. Putin staggered through the corridor, his shoes leaving wet prints on the polished floor. He looked back once and saw Trump's portrait, grinning unnaturally wide, the paint dripping down like flesh melting. His chest tightened. He didn't breathe again until he was outside, stumbling into the humid Washington night. Within an hour, his motorcade sped through the city, photographers catching only blurred shots of his pale, sweating face through tinted glass. Reporters said he looked sick. Some said he looked broken. They were wrong. He didn't look sick. He looked haunted. Back in Moscow, his speeches shifted. His words were fractured. His tone cracked in ways it never had before. He spoke of America differently, not as a rival, but as something rotten. He said the White House was not a house at all. It was a tomb. He never named Trump directly, but he dropped fragments, hints. He said America's leader was not who people thought he was. He said the power inside the White House wasn't political, wasn't human, wasn't even earthly, and his inner circle began disappearing. Ministers, advisors, translators, vanishing one by one. No funerals. No explanations, just gone. His paranoia bled into the Kremlin halls, but the fear didn't start there. It started in Washington. It started in that chamber, because even as he tried to bury it, as he tried to outrun it, Putin couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't escaped. That door had closed, yes, but the chamber had followed him. He saw Trump's face in reflections, in glass, in shadows. Sometimes he swore he saw the smile twitch across his own, aides' mouths when they thought he wasn't looking. The secret beneath the White House hadn't stayed buried. The tank still hummed. The corpses still twitched. The thing in the largest tank was still smiling, and now it was awake, watching, waiting.